people come out to see us, and uh, it was great to be with people, but also Yousef got COVID. So had to spend 5 days in a hotel in Philadelphia, but was well taken care of. I think he said he felt loved and supported despite that. So he agreed to come back this year to do the West Coast. We had hoped to have another colleague with us, Rifat Alarir, who wrote the opening chapter in this book. And if you haven't read it yet, when you do read it, you will remember that chapter because it is a very gripping personal story, really asking us in the West to listen to Palestinian voices from Gaza and to make it matter to them, that their voices are heard. So it's quite a beautiful chapter. And he is an amazing professor of English literature. He teaches Shakespeare in Gaza City and taught Yousef and taught Jihad how to speak English and how to write. So I personally was really looking forward to bringing Rafat here and to be here with his students to travel. But as we know from the cruelness of this blockade against Gaza, it's very difficult for people to travel, and he was not able to leave Gaza despite making a lot of attempts this summer. So Yousef is our solo guest on this tour, but he definitely has enough stories to fill many evenings, both as his own personal story, which he writes about in the book, but also just from his life. He's a young man still, but a lover of history and great person to travel with. I have to say, I met Yousef, as Cindy said, back in 2014 when he came to the U.S. On a speaking tour called Gaza Writes Back, which is another book you might want to check out. It's a collection of short stories, and Yousef was a contributor to that book, edited by Rifat, and they both came to the U.S. And I got the pleasure of watching Yousef step out into the snow for the first time in his life. So now that he lives in Turkey, where he just this February finished his PhD, yay, bravo. And another change from last year to this year is Yousef is now a married man. He just got married actually a week ago. So this is his honeymoon, is to be speaking to her. Very generous wife. So we're pleased to for me to have the honor to travel with Yousef. He is a wonderful storyteller, also a journalist and a serious writer, and you're going to love both his stories about Gaza's history, about Gaza's present day. He'll explain he still has his family living in Gaza. He's a refugee. There's so many aspects of Palestine that he could speak to from personal experience. And that really was the point of this book. Yousef is just one of 12 Palestinians who contributed to this anthology. And I remember when we approached Haymarket Books with this idea, this was our COVID project, by the way. We were hoping to do a speaking tour in 2020, and life changed. So we decided, well, let's still find a way to bring voices from Gaza to Americans. So we decided to do a book project, and I'd never done a book before. Now I know a lot about it. And Haymarket, we approached Haymarket Books, and we said we'd like to do an anthology and bring all these Gaza writers. This was our idea, and they're like, anthologies don't really sell very well. And I'm like, come on, it's a book about Gaza. How many books are there out about Gaza that have so many different writers? And so they were quickly convinced, and it is one of their better seller in selling books. So we're pleased about that. But what we really wanted to do with this book is, yes, to bring a lot of voices from Gaza. But what we asked when we sent out the request for submissions was, we asked Palestinians to write about not just their present view of Gaza, but what do they envision for the future? How can we think about a time for Gaza and Palestine beyond the realities of today, beyond the Nakba, the catastrophes that have continued to happen to Gaza? And can we think about Gaza not just when the bombs are falling and the tragedy, the victims, when you're seeing the pain of Gaza, but also to explore what is the joy, what has kept people alive, what has kept 2.3 million people living and thriving, even in an open air prison, in a 25-mile enclave. So this we hope gives some of the answers to that. The contributors come from very many different backgrounds. We have an architect writing about architectural styles and how do we build Gaza to meet the needs of the current population. We have poetry and cultural history in the book. We have conversations about the importance of land and agriculture, the experience of colonialism, and what has that meant for the for Palestinians in Gaza. So there's many things in this book, and Yousef's chapter he'll talk about, but really is this whole idea of lack of freedom of movement, of the fragmentation of Palestinian society. That was a continuing theme as well in this book. And throughout, the desire for Palestinians to connect to their homes, some of the homes which are only just a few miles away outside of Gaza. So that's a little bit about the book, and I'll now turn it over to Yousef, but it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much for the Rachel Corey Foundation and for the American Friends Service Committee for organizing this leg of the West Coast tour of Light in Gaza. As Jennifer has mentioned, it's very special to be in Olympia. I have always heard about Olympia, and every single Palestinian in Gaza in particular knows this town and the name Rachel Corey. So it's very special to finally be in Olympia and to talk about Gaza, and at the same time to honor the legacy of Rachel Corey and the work the Rachel Corey Foundation is doing for Palestine and justice and to Gaza as well. So I grew up in a refugee camp in Gaza. We have 8 refugee camps in the coastal enclave. My refugee camp is called the Nusayrat, and it's in the middle area of the Gaza Strip. So the Gaza Strip is divided into 4 areas. The south, which includes Rafah city, and that is closer to Egypt. And then the middle area, where Nusayrat is located, and then Gaza city, and the north. My family ended up in the Gaza Strip in 1948. Half of the family, extended family, ended up the Gaza Strip. The other half ended up in the West Bank. So we come from a village called Aqr near Lod and Ramle. My great grandfather was killed in the village just 3 or 4 days before his children had to leave the village at gunpoint, and they were made refugees in Gaza. So I inherited this status of being refugee from my grandparents and from my parents. Um, and the situation in Gaza has been getting worse over the years, unfortunately. I grew up in a place called Block A in Nusayrat, which literally used to be a British prison during the First World War. The gate to that prison is now the actual gate to the refugee community where I grew up. And that's like the only way to get in and out of the refugee community. So I want you to imagine like growing up in what used to be a prison, in the biggest open air prison, the Gaza Strip. Ironically, just 6 years before Nakba in 1942, 1,000 Greek refugees lived in Block A as refugees when Nazi Germany invaded their island. So this is, the cycle of being refugees. Some Palestinians became refugees for the second and third and fourth time in their life. These days, Palestinians from Gaza, including from my refugee camp, are becoming refugees in Greece again because of the cruelty of the siege imposed on Gaza. In the book, I talk about travel restrictions and how travel restrictions impact my family. Not because the story of my family is unique. It's not. It's almost the story of every single family in Gaza and Palestine. But because, when we talk about personal experiences, I think it helps people who are not familiar, who did not visit Gaza, who did not live in Gaza, relate to our experience. So we are no longer statistics and numbers in some UN reports. We are human beings, and this is very important, especially when there is a fierce campaign to dehumanize the Palestinian people and reduce them into numbers and say there are 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, or 10 Palestinians were killed or injured or arrested. So every single Palestinian has a story, and this story should be told. And that's why we are here today. Uh, so for 20 years, and when we talk about Nakba, it started in 1947, 1948, but it never ended. Nakba is still going on, and different generations of Palestinians have suffered from the implications of Nakba. My grandparents suffered from Nakba. My parents suffered from Nakba. I am suffering from Nakba as of now. And I will explain how. So Nakba did not end. It only started in 1948, and we still live it, unfortunately, every day in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine, but specifically in Gaza. For 20 years, my extended family was divided between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So my father's side of the family ended up in the Gaza Strip. Actually, they lived in Rafah for a few months before they moved to a Nusayrat refugee camp in the early 50s. My mother's side of the family ended up in the West Bank, in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem, and they finally relocated to Jericho. So from day one, when Israel was established, my extended family was split into two. And today, when we talk about the political division of Palestinians, which I think is the case in many other countries, that including countries that are not under occupation, it's a geographic division that was created by Israel. So it's not just like a political division, but also a geopolitical division that was made possible by the geographic separation of families and territories. by Israel. So for 20 years, my extended family was split and they were not able to physically meet. So if they wanted to meet, they had to travel to, say, from the West Bank to Jordan, and from Jordan to Egypt, and then to Gaza, which was not possible at the time because they ended up with nothing as refugees. They were very poor and they did not have the means to travel and meet. For 20 years, unfortunately, were not able to meet. But ironically, they were reunified under occupation. When Israel finished the job and occupied the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So they had like a sense of relief for a few years under occupation. They were able to move and visit, like travel from Gaza to the West Bank and vice versa. And this is how my parents met. So my parents come from the same extended family, and they met after, Israel allowed Palestinians to travel from the Gaza Strip to the West Bank and vice versa. And this is how my parents got married. So imagine like changing your address in the US because you move out of, say, Colombia to, God forbid, Portland. Is Olympia part of Oregon or Seattle? I'm confused. Washington. So my mother was not aware of the implications of changing her address. She just got married and she moved to Gaza and she changed her address from Bethlehem to Gaza. But Israel gave her a new ID because Palestinians from Gaza have a different ID than Palestinians from the. I mean, it looks the same, but once your ID says Gaza, that's like a death sentence. It's like a capital punishment. She was not. She had to change her address because it was easier for her to, pay bills, etc., and go to the hospital. But then, in Israel's eyes, she became a resident of Gaza, and in order to, starting from 1993, when the Palestinian Authority was established following the Oslo Accords between the Palestine Liberation Organization and Israel, she needed a permit to visit her own hometown. This was possible up until 2000 when the Second Palestinian Intifada broke out. Giving permits to Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank to visit each other became almost like a nightmare, impossible. So for 12 years, my mother was not able to visit her family for no reason. So she would apply and then she would get a rejection with an explanation that, like, she's a security threat or she doesn't meet the criteria. Like, what criteria? She's visiting her hometown. In the process in 2003, and you can imagine, like, not being able to see your own parents and siblings for 12 years. In 2003, her father passed away. In 2008, her mother passed away, and she was not able to participate in the funeral procession. I mean, this is Nakba. That's why I say it's an ongoing Nakba. It's not over. The fact that Palestinians cannot have a final, look at their parents when they pass away, this is Nakba. And again, the story of my mother is not unique. There are thousands of families from Gaza and the West Bank who have families in, both territories who suffered from the same problem. So I talk about this in the book because it's important for people to understand, the implications of travel restrictions and separation imposed on the Palestinian people. And despite, the tragic reality and denial and rejections of permits, there's always a way. So I thought, this is unfair. I have to write about it. And I have to get some journalists to interview my mom. Maybe this will create some noise because, it doesn't work like the normal way. If you're too silent, then you will never get a permit. You have to make some noise. So, like, after some articles and interviews and um, different attempts to get her a permit. An Israeli human rights organization called Gisha had to go to the Israeli Supreme Court and file a case on her behalf to get a permit. Imagine. And she got a 4-day permit after 12 years. Of course, she overstayed. She didn't care. She stayed there for like 32 days. Um, and it was easy to go back to Gaza. Israel is not interested in, Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. They would immediately send them back to Gaza. But to go from Gaza to the West Bank, it's easier to travel to the US, although it's not easy. Like Rifat was not able to travel, but it's easier to travel to the US from Gaza than to travel from Gaza to the West Bank. Um, that's just when we talk about division. This division was made possible by Israel in the first place. Um, Again, in 2015, my eldest uncle passed away. He was in the hospital, he was dying, and my mom tried to get a permit to see him. And they kept waiting until he passed away, and the next day they issued the permit. She was not able to see him before he was buried. Um, but again, she was able to go to the West Bank and see her family. In 2018, she got cancer, breast cancer. And because of the siege imposed on Gaza, the health infrastructure is very weak. So that we do not have hospitals in Gaza that can treat cancer patients. So people in Gaza who have cancer, and there are thousands of them, have to apply for an Israeli permit to travel to Jerusalem, the West Bank. In the past, some of them went to hospitals in Israel itself, but now mostly to the West Bank, and especially to Augusta Victoria Hospital in Jerusalem. And then they have to wait for Israel's mercy, whether they will be given a permit or not. There are hundreds of patients who lost their lives waiting for Israeli permits to be issued. But my mom was lucky enough to get the permit. Other people were not lucky uh, enough to get these permits. In some cases, Israel would give cancer patients permits to have the first chemotherapy session, but not the second one. And then they would blackmail them to collaborate against their people to get permits. And these stories are known to the Palestinian people. So this regime of permit is used to collectively punish Palestinians and push them to surrender. Many patients choose to die in Gaza rather than to get these permits in return for collaboration with Israel and the Israeli authorities against their people. Um, and again, when I say it's multi-generational and it's ongoing, and in 2007, my sister needed a permit to have a minor surgery, which again was not available in Gaza, just like a 10-minute surgery. She applied for an Israeli permit. She waited at the hospital for 1 week. She did not get the permit. She got a rejection with the same explanation, a security threat. So the only way for her to leave Gaza was the Rafah crossing, and it was shut down at the time, so it's not always open. I mean, now it's open, quote unquote, but in the past, it would shut down for like 2, 3 weeks, 3 months, and you have like urgent cases. People cannot wait like for 3 months. Patients cannot wait. So a lot of them lose their lives waiting. When she was finally able to leave Gaza through Egypt, she had the surgery, but it was too late. Her body was too weak to handle the surgery. And the following day, she lost her life. She was 26 years old. She was a teacher working for the UN in Gaza, and her life was abruptly ended uh, uh, because of this regime of permits. And even bringing her body back to Gaza was a challenge because the Rafah crossing was shut down. So my father and aunt who were with her would bring her body from Al Arish Hospital, 50 miles away from Gaza, in an ambulance and drive to Gaza border to get into Gaza through the Kerem Shalom, Karm Abu Salim crossing, which is Israeli controlled, and Israeli officers would send them back for 2 days. Imagine, like with a dead body in the summer. So I told my father at the time, like pay them money or just like bury her wherever you are. He said, no, I want to bring her back to Gaza. So on the third day, they were allowed to enter Gaza. And as they entered, Israeli soldiers at the border, my dad spoke Hebrew very well, fluently, from his work in Israel for decades as a cheap laborer in the first Palestinian, like in the 80s and 70s. So an Israeli soldier asked my dad, who was crying, why do you cry? Like all of us will die, he told him. So, even after her death and like bringing her body to, she was, prevented from receiving medical attention. But even after she was dead, they did not have respect for, the dead. And this is common in Israel. There are hundreds of Palestinians who are held in numbers graveyards. They're given numbers. Even after they're shot and killed, their families are not allowed to take their bodies and bury them. And again, this is another means of collective punishment. The same as they demolish the houses of Palestinians after their death, they hold their bodies. There are Palestinians who have their bodies held by Israel since the 70s and 80s, up until now, in these numbers graveyards. And in many cases, because of flooding and heavy rain, like the graves and bodies would wash up. So, like complete disregard to the to the dead and no respect whatsoever to their families. So it's like a process of humiliation. I mentioned my dad working in Israel as a cheap laborer in the 70s and 80s. And uh, Israeli soldiers would always, have a patrol unit at the entrance of the refugee community I lived in Gaza, Block A. And they would humiliate Palestinians in different ways, including asking them to dance. So one day, my dad was going back from his work, and they stopped him and they asked him to dance. Because on the other side of the road, there was a cafe where Palestinians, gathered to drink coffee and listen to music. And many of these Palestinians were my father's like neighbors and friends. So they wanted to humiliate him in front of people who knew him very well by asking him to dance. And like the worst thing on earth is to ask an Arab father to dance. Like they never dance. But then if you say no, that's probably the end of your life. You have no choice but to dance, but to be humiliated, to avoid death. But if you're smart enough, like my dad, maybe you can get away. So my dad said, okay, I can dance for you, but you have to clap for me. We need some vibes. It's like, can you dance without music and vibes? It's impossible. So they put their guns aside and they started clapping for him. He picked up his slippers and he ran away. So people started like laughing at them. It's sad story, but funny. It's that's like a humor under occupation. And he hid in a nearby orange orchard, climbed one of the high trees, and he hid there. And they were crazy looking for him. And there were all types of rumors about his fate. Some people said he was killed, shot, injured, tortured. My grandparents were so worried about his fate. At the time, he was not able to communicate with his family because we didn't have like iPhones or smartphones, stupid phones, or anything like that. So he kept waiting until Israeli soldiers left the area, and then he went to a nearby mosque and he made the call for the sunset prayer. That was his way of communicating with his family. They heard him like loudspeakers. They knew that he was alive and kicking. Um, so, as I said, the situation is very tragic. Many Palestinians lose their lives, or many students lose their scholarships waiting for crossings to open, or permits to be issued. At the same time, I don't want you to remember Gaza as a helpless place. Gaza is one of the most important cities throughout history. It's one of the oldest cities uh, in the world. It's 3,500 years old. Um, and every time and then you hear about archaeological discoveries in Gaza. Just last week, recently, a Roman graveyard was uncovered in Gaza, and last week, four more graves were uncovered, including a grave. There's a picture online, you can find it, of a couple, like the skeletons of a couple who were hugging when they passed away. So Gaza is not new to history. In fact, we are very proud of our history. We are proud of our pagan history, of our Jewish history, Christian history, and Muslim history. We are very grounded in history, and there are a lot of stories of coexistence in Palestine and in Gaza itself. Um, the the Alexander the Great tried to conquer Gaza three times. What the first time he failed, second time he failed and he lost his leg, and the third time he was able to conquer Gaza. So historically, the people of Gaza have been very stubborn and resilient, and they wouldn't like easily give up. And this is the situation today. 98.5% of the people of Gaza are literate. We have a lot of educated people. We are proud of our history. We are proud of who we are, even though we live in refugee camps and miserable conditions. And in many cases, Palestinian refugees could literally spot the town and the village where their ancestors and families were forced to leave in 1948. We have a lot of artists and poets. The designer of Light in Gaza, the cover Flight in Gaza, Malak Matar, is now touring Hawaii, exhibiting her artwork. Mus'ab Abu Toha, one of the contributors to the anthology, is a poet, and he won a national award in the United States. A lot of people who contributed to the book are PhDs, and many of my friends, I remember this picture from 2013. A lot of young people are leaving Gaza today because of the miserable situation and the man-made humanitarian crisis. But they're also trying to work on themselves. We have a lot of people who are very successful in the IT sector. They work with companies even in the US. Um, there's a 13-year-old rapper from Gaza. His name is MC Abdul. He's now touring the Bay Area. Um, I know also 16-year-old at the time, 2016, 17, boy who was into video gaming, and now he relocated to the Bay Area. He's working in the Silicon Valley. So we don't want to be remembered as victims and Palestinians are poor and refugees. Let's give them some aid. It's a political question of Palestinian refugees. 70% of the population of Gaza are refugees, including my family. And that's why we had the Great March of Return. That is now stopped because of COVID, and now it's going back to the borders. Palestinian refugees are affirming their right to return. And this is a very important message. Even after 75 years, Israeli leaders and politicians and the founders of Israel said the old will die, the young will forget. But this is not the case. Even the old, like we have Ahmed al-Hajj, 90 years old. Uh, he became a refugee at the age of 16. He ended up in Gaza. He still lives in a rental house. Up until now, he refuses to buy a house and settle, although he has the financial means. He was one of the first teachers in Gaza with a master's degree. He refused to purchase a land and build a house because for him, Gaza and his refugee camp in Gaza is a temporary stage in his life. He wants to go back to his town. This is the reality that we want to convey to the world. Uh, it's a political question. Uh, Despite the tragedies that I highlighted, we have also a lot of success stories. And we envision the future of Gaza beyond apartheid and segregation and separation. We do believe that Gaza is an integral part of Palestine, and Gaza could be connected to the rest of Palestine, but also to the rest of the world. We have some people in this town visited Gaza, and they have seen, the golden sand beaches of Gaza. It's it could be a very attractive place for tourists. It's a tourist attraction, beautiful beaches, and with people with high literacy rates and degrees and education, Gaza can also contribute to the world. We're not just victims. We are also not heroes. We suffer a lot. Being in Gaza and under occupation and like having surveillance and drones and multiple wars waged on you is a lot psychologically. And losing family members and having to, we leave Gaza, but Gaza doesn't leave us, even if we tour the world. The psychological impact of being a Palestinian in itself is a lot. But at the same time, we don't want to be remembered as victims or as just like helpless refugees. We can contribute to the world. Gaza can be connected to the rest of Palestine. I don't think it's too hard to open the seaport of Gaza. We had an airport in Gaza until 2000, and Israel destroyed it completely. So that we again travel through Israel and go through the humiliating process that I mentioned of getting permits. It's not difficult to connect Gaza with the rest of Palestine, with the West Bank, with a train, like a train. It's not about security. But Israel doesn't want Palestinians to be together. They want Palestinians to be fragmented forever. And then blame them for their misery. Because you're not united, as if Israeli political parties today are united. They're not. Even in the US, there is political division. This is the case everywhere. But blaming Palestinians because there is no partner for peace. Because these helpless refugees, they don't want to settle in Gaza. Why they should settle in Gaza when their towns is literally across the border? So we imagine a future in which Gaza is connected to the rest of Palestine and in which Palestinians can have equal rights, and Palestinians will never settle for less than equal rights. And if anyone has a problem with equal rights, that's their fault. They can leave. I mean, if you look at the history of Gaza, and I want to conclude with this story, as I said, we are very proud of our history, of who we are, and today, end of September, like early October, that's when Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine harvest their olives. Um, when we harvest our olives in Gaza, we say Salla bis-Salib, which means the cross has materialized. And it has a very interesting story that tells, the unique history of Gaza. We also have a stereotype that Palestinians in Gaza love spices, which has to do with the history of Gaza and the fact that Gaza is a seaport where a lot of spices came, through Gaza to the rest of the Arab world. But to go back to olives and the olive harvest and the cross has materialized, the story goes like this. So a priest came to Gaza because Gaza was pagan, and Gaza was the last city in Palestine to become Christian when Palestine converted to Christianity. And he saw like all these dry trees, and he told people like, it's dry because you do not believe in Christianity. So if I pray to God and it rains, then you should believe in Christianity. So they told him, Yalla, go and pray. If it rains, then we believe in Christianity. So he prayed and it rained. So they believed in Christianity and they said, the cross has materialized. The priest was right. And since then, because it was around this time, like in the fall, when it rains for the first time, that's the sign to harvest olive and say, Salla bis-Salib, the cross has materialized. So this is how we want Gaza to be remembered. It's a place for coexistence, but coexistence based on equal rights and nothing less.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm sitting here with memories flooding me. It was 2012, the last time that Craig and I were able to enter Gaza. And so much of what you shared, there are just pieces, memories of the spirit of the people in Gaza and the beautiful things that we saw, and also all the pain. So I think you get a sense about the spirit of these people and of Palestinian youth right now. I think it's amazing what we're seeing, how they have found their voices and are speaking to us. I know you have questions, and we want to move to Q&A. So I'd like to, there are a couple of announcements. If you have any questions on your note cards, please, can you just make sure that our staff back there get those, and they're ready to take them from you if you have questions. And we will see that those get answered. They'll bring them to me. If you want to write them down as we're going and you don't want to raise your hand, they're glad to pick them up and bring them up to us too. So please make use of that if that's helpful to you. Bringing events like this to Olympia, of course, involves expenses for the tour sponsors, AFSC, and for the hosts. And so to support the program tonight and those that are coming up this week throughout the Northwest, we'd like to help ensure that this work happens and continues. So our staff are going to pass baskets. If you're able to contribute anything, that would be very helpful. There'll be a basket back on the table when you leave as well, if that's easier for you. You can write checks to the Rachel Corrie Foundation, and we will be splitting all the proceeds to support the tour, AFSC, and the Rachel Corrie Foundation's work tonight. So thank you for any help you can give us with that. Let's see if I have anything else I want to say before we move to that. No, I don't think so. Please bring your questions to Yousef and to Jennifer. This is a great opportunity. If you can direct your question to one of them or both of them, that would be great. Please, if you have comments and statements, keep them brief so we can make room for as many people to ask questions tonight. We'll be doing this for, I think, until about 8:15, so we have over 20 minutes, and we can get that underway. So, Craig.
I have a question, Cindy. Can we just ask questions from the field, or do we have to write them down?
You don't have to write them down. No, you can raise your hand. Just let us know you have a question. Just whatever you're more comfortable with. Yes, Therese.
Yeah, thank you both, and thank you, Yousef, for sharing your family story, especially. We were talking earlier, and you were sharing a bit about the different solidarity movements that you've heard from, been connected to. Could you say a little bit more about that internationally, where you're experiencing the solidarity and the support for the boycott movement and details like that?
Did you understand?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. So there is a strong connection between Palestinians and the Irish people throughout history. And I worked on a book on Palestinian and Irish hunger strikers, telling their stories. It's called The Shared Struggle. The word boycott itself emerged in Ireland, and boycott was a British landlord who was boycotted by the Irish people. So people would say like boycott, like avoid boycott, and then it emerged there. So there is a strong sense of solidarity with the Palestinian people in Ireland. If you go to Ireland, you will always find the murals of Palestine there. There was a letter actually that was sent by Palestinian political prisoners in 1981 in solidarity with Irish hunger strikers, including Bobby Sands, who lost his life at the time after 44 days of hunger strike. There is also a strong sense of solidarity between Palestinians and South Africans, and some people are critical of, the situation in South Africa today, and that apartheid is not over yet, specifically economically. But Palestinians connect with that, and like segregation and racism that people of South Africa have gone through is similar to what they go through. And that's why there's also a strong sense of solidarity with Palestinians in South Africa. Uh, I also remember in like Palestinians at the Great March of Return, which broke out in 2018, using similar tactics used at Standing Rock in the US. So protesters at the Great March of Return used mirrors to blur the vision of Israeli snipers who were like sniping them literally like ducks and bragging about like sniping kids, which is on video. Uh, so they try to blur their visions by, using mirrors or burning tires, which was again used elsewhere in the web and Standing Rock, specifically in relation to mirrors. There is a strong sense of solidarity between Palestinians and Hawaiians. The sovereign Hawaiian movement and people who work for the movement are very much aware of what's happening to the Palestinian people. In fact, there were delegations from Hawaii that visited the West Bank. There were also delegations from Black Lives Matter that visited Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. So Palestinians also connect and understand the plight of African Americans and police brutality and surveillance. There is a mural of George Floyd in Gaza. I remember also reading Rifat Al teaching us about Malcolm X in Gaza, and I remember the one of my uh, classmates said, "I wish if I were, if I wish if I was born black after reading Malcolm X." So we have, a strong connection with different groups, the Aboriginals in Australia, the Maori in New Zealand. I was in New Zealand 2013, and I went to the Auckland Museum, and there was like this, like writings on the wall of the museum that says Memorial for Fallen Soldiers in Palestine, 1916, 1918. That's years before, Israel was created. And unfortunately, even like some Maori forces were used, and this is what British settler colonialism have done to the Palestinians and to the world. Native Maoris were killed in Gaza as part of the Allied forces. They brought indigenous people to invade Palestine, and we have some of their graves in the British cemetery in Gaza. You can tell from the names that they were Maori.
We have two questions here. This is for you, Yousef. What is your sense of the US as you travel and speak here?
So the first time I was in the US, I was also with the Quakers in 2014. And today is almost like 10 years. I have never um, like got a heckler or someone like protesting my talk. So I know that in some places there's some people who are not happy, but I think Americans are more willing to listen to the plight of the Palestinian people. We are more heard. There is a change, but this change is not great, but it's happening. It's slow, and we know from other experiences that change might take decades. So we are on the right path, even if it takes us another 50 years or 100 years. We are on the right path. We are, winning the hearts and minds of more people, engaging with different people from different backgrounds, students, unions and churches and synagogues, and talking to different people and telling them our story. So there's, I see the change happening. In the past, the Palestinians in the US would be afraid to say that they are Palestinians. Today, they are proud to say that. And Just last week, we had the Palestine Rice Festival where 1,500 people participated, and many of them were from Palestine, Palestinian poets and artists. So we are proud of our cultural heritage, and we are proud of it, and we are more public about it because we sense that Americans are more willing to listen to us than 20 years ago. Today, you hear about Palestine in the U.S. Congress. We have the first Palestinian American, Rashid Tlaib, elected to the U.S. Congress. This was not the case before. Palestinians are more aware of lobbying and speaking to their representatives and getting their allies to work together to bring about change. We have bills that Jennifer will talk about in the U.S. House of Representatives that support Palestinian rights, which was not the case. It's not enough. I'm not happy like you'll say, oh, we're done now. It's liberation time. No, we still have a lot of work to do. But there is definitely a change and shift in the public opinion, even among Jewish Americans and their understanding of what's happening in Palestine. The work that Jewish Voice for Peace is doing. We were in Portland, and a lot of people who participated and organized were from Jewish Voice for Peace. So this is important and it's happening, but it will take time and we understand. But the sad reality is that it will be painful for Palestinians until it happens. So there's definitely a gap between the grassroots level, what we see on the ground, and what politicians do. And this is what politicians do in many countries. So the US is not an exception. It's who pays more,
That reminds me that I should have said at the beginning that this event is sponsored by us, but also by Jewish Voice for Peace Tacoma. And they're our partners and friends. And tomorrow, Yousef and Jennifer will be speaking at Tacoma Community College. And I'll be up there with them and with members of Jewish Voice for Peace Tacoma. So the organizing that we do together is really helpful. Great. Next question can be for both of you, and that is, what has been the response to the book?
Jennifer.
Okay. It's been great. When we sent out the review copy to 12 different people to review the book, everyone responded, which again, our publisher was like, wow, you got that fast, like, because it's a great book. And it was, so that was the first thing that was really fun. And some of them are in the front of the book. I remember a week after the book was published in August of 2022, last year, I got a call from an old friend of mine who said, Jennifer, your name's in the New York Times. They've reviewed your book. And it was one of the books, I think it was like books to buy or something. And they had a nice little blurb in the New York Times book review. So it's been received well. We did create a study guide because we want this book to be read in book groups. We think it's a good book group kind of book because there's a lot of different stories in here. So maybe, the chapter on artificial intelligence doesn't interest you, but it might interest somebody who's interested in that topic. Or maybe you're interested in cultural issues and there's a chapter about that. Or maybe you're interested in colonial history and there's that as well. So there's a lot of different things in the book, but they all have a personal narrative and story to them that I think makes it feel accessible and authentic. So I think that's how people have been receiving the book. I've been encouraging people to buy the book. Some people still read. Some people still read books, which is good. And we're encouraging people to buy one for your library or buy one for your friend, or it's a good thing to get books out there. And so people have been doing that. One person asked me, well, are you gonna go and give every member of Congress a copy of the book? And I'm like, we would have to fundraise to do that. But we have been taking copies to members of Congress as well. Yousef was with us last year. We met with one of our senators in Washington, DC, and gave him a copy of the book, and it was quite moving. Remember the intern was who was taking notes with the staffer who was more serious, was engaged, but the intern was like tearing up, because she hadn't heard these stories before. So that's also a nice thing about the book, is that it I'm a kind of activist that likes to work with both the head and the heart, to intellectually grapple with difficult issues, to talk about, to understand documentation of Palestinian children in detention, things like that, but also to connect people to people and to be able to see these stories and these people as human beings like ourselves. And as Yousef says, we want equality. We want to have our generous lives. We want to live with dignity. And I think that's something universal. And hopefully people will be moved to do more after reading the book.
I just wanted to add that tomorrow we will be taking Yousef and Jennifer to Tacoma, as I told you about, and we will be stopping with staffers in Senator Cantwell's office and also Derek Kilmer's office. We're still working on Murray. We haven't had a reply back yet, but they all three have offices in the same building, so we'll make a stop there. And I'm planning to share books with those staffers. Other questions? Yes.
You had mentioned about the man who was 90 and didn't want to buy a house there. I'm wondering that sense of temporariness across the area, and how does that, do people plant gardens or plant orchards, or is that too much of a commitment because they want to go back to where they are?
I mean,
or other examples.
This is an exceptional story. People now, like my family, built a modern house. But they still identify as refugees, and when you ask them where you from, they tell you the village they came from. So they do not identify as Palestinians from Gaza, although Gaza is a very special part of Palestine that is very close to our hearts. You also see, the connection refugees have with their towns and villages, and manifesting in different ways. In kindergartens, schools, people divide themselves into groups, and then they would name these groups after their towns and villages. Up until now, there are a lot of Palestinian refugees who get married from the same town and village. And so this gives them a sense of community and culture. So yeah, these refugees are still connecting with their heritage and where they come from. Reading about the older generation, many refugees who became refugees in 1948 passed away, now 75 years later. But their kids, even you see sometimes the name of kids like Yafa, which is Jaffa, Palestine, the names of kids, Jenin. So Palestinians make sure that their kids to stick to their right of return. Although we have now more modern houses, but you can still tell this is like a refugee camp. It's very crowded. There is no space. There is no sense of privacy. Refugee camps look like concrete jungle. Like you just have concrete. So yeah, we have some exceptional stories of people completely refusing to accept the fact that they became refugees. But then the rest of the population, they deal with their day-to-day life, and they accept that they are refugees, but they do not accept the fact that this is their forever situation.
Yes.
I have a question. You know, Israel is a very small country. I was there once.
Go ahead. Could you start
Yeah.
again so you said?
Israel is a small country. Palestine, Israel is a small country. I was there once. But I'm wondering, aren't there Israeli journalists who are reporting about what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank? Isn't there education in the schools in Israel providing the history? Aren't there protests by Jewish people about what's going on in Gaza? Aren't there delegations of Jewish students from the universities or high schools coming to Gaza or Palestinians going into Israel? Don't they see the rampant discrimination just miles away? Don't they see the border fence? As the older generation dies, are the younger people going to change? And after the Holocaust in Europe, which was only 80 years ago, can't the Jewish people see that they are doing the same thing to Palestinians that were done to them in Europe within our lifetimes? I mean, how can it be so? How can they be so blind?
I think both of you can take it.
Okay, let me think a little bit about this question. So there are, Jewish Israelis who support Palestinian human rights, but you can literally number them. The number is, we're talking about the best cases, hundreds. Unfortunately, the Israeli society has been going steadily towards the far right. And you can tell from, the names of officials and politicians, government today. So there are some people who protest sometimes at the Gaza border, but again, they have no influence in the Israeli society, and they're called all types of names for supporting Palestinian rights. One of them is Miko Peled, who is an American Israeli, who I brought to Gaza through the tunnels with Egypt. And many people did not believe, they were asking, was he physically in Gaza? Because they wouldn't imagine that an Israeli would come into Gaza. But this is the extreme exception. Yeah, they're not allowed by law. If they cross even to the West Bank, there are signs saying danger, do not cross. This is area A, this is area B, because the West Bank is divided into area A, B, C, and there are different regulations and control. So Israelis are not allowed to cross. But the truth is that the majority of the Israeli society live completely a different life. I mean, when Israel was bombing Gaza, Israelis were on the beach enjoying their summer. And it's just two different stories, completely isolated from reality. The majority of Israelis only see Palestinians when they serve in the army, and they see them as a security threat. And that's why every day we hear at checkpoints Palestinians being shot. It's very easy for 18 years older, 18 years old Israelis who serve in the army to shoot at Palestinians, because they the education system. Speaking of the education system, Nurit Peled, Miko's sister, wrote about how Palestinians are portrayed in the Israeli education system, and how the Israelis are fed, they're told, propaganda and narrative that serves the Israeli state. So Palestinians are not innocent or normal human beings in Israeli textbooks. And Israel always talks about hatred in Palestinian textbooks, but they never talk about, what they teach Israeli kids in school. In my life in Gaza for 23 years, I've never seen an Israeli. Now that even it's more automated, the automation of war and surveillance. We have drones, we have walls, we even jeeps. They do not have drivers anymore. Everything is automated, computers and drones and missiles. And we do not see them. So Israelis live in a different world, I would say. They do not see Palestinians, and when they see them, they do not see them as humans. They're like told a narrative that show them Palestinians as threats. Although, if we go back in history, just in the 80s and 70s, a lot of Palestinians from Gaza were working in Israel, and some Israelis would literally drive into Gaza and buy fish because Gaza was way cheaper than Israel. But today, the far right in Israel is in government. They're the leaders of the Israeli society, and their word is the final word. Uh, so I personally do not see that now Israelis are protesting about judicial reforms that Netanyahu is trying to introduce. There's some of them, like 10, 15, who try to raise the Palestinian flag and talk about the occupation, and they were crushed by other protesters. So they're not worried about what's happening to the Palestinian people. Although if they look down, like they're protesting on the ruins of Palestinian villages. And if they look down, they literally find mass graves. But again, this is a taboo. They will not talk about it. They will talk about their own freedom because it's a democracy for Jews only. So Palestinians are completely marginalized and excluded in this narrative. And it's about, Israelis fearing that they will lose the democracy that they had for themselves. It's not about Palestinians.
Yeah, it's.
And Palestinians cannot, I cannot go to the West Bank to go to Israel in the first place. My mom is she cannot go to the West Bank. So this is like, the last time I was in the West Bank was 24 years ago when I was a little kid. And in order to see my West Bank family, I travel to Jordan, or they come to Turkey, or we meet in the US or in Europe, but not in the West Bank.
It is a sorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just a sorrow.
We're going to have to close the questions soon, but somebody spent a lot of time writing this one, and I want to take this as the last question and then give the floor to Jennifer for some final remarks about things we'd like you all to know. So the question is, increasing numbers of faith communities in the US are reconsidering and repudiating the doctrine of discovery and the displacement of indigenous people rooted in that document. What progress have you achieved by reaching out to these faith communities and inviting and challenging them to raise their voices against the contemporary displacement of Palestinians from their lands by a government allied in many ways with the US government?
That's a question for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's a good one.
Well, that leads me to, yes, I think I'm still thinking about that previous question because it is about like, what do you see? What do you know? What do you learn? And I think we've also had a reckoning in this country in the last decade, even in the last few years of communities thinking about our own settler colonial country and the way that we have treated Black people, the racism that still exists, and the divisions in this country are deep, as we see in our Congress today. But I do find a growing number of faith communities finding their voice during these last few years and making these important connections. And one of the projects that the American Friends Service Committee is excited to be a part of is called the Apartheid Free Communities Initiative. And there's some cards on your table about that. We have our little pins if you want to take one. And that's really started as a faith-based initiative. It was Christian communities who had labored over divestment resolutions, talked about what can we do. they had gone on delegations to Palestine and Israel. They met with Palestinians. They wanted to do something. And it passed some very bold and very good resolutions and at conferences and labored for decades to get those passed. But when they passed, did people know back in the churches and the pews, did they know that the Presbyterian Church had divested from HP? No, it wasn't filtering down. And with the with so many reports coming out, the documentation from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, all these reports talking about Israel as an apartheid state have kind of gave a new energy to these same groups of churches and others to say, well, let's try to seize this moment, because we are talking more about race. We are thinking more about, about oppression, about who's in power and those kind of things. So let's think about what could we do collectively that would amplify our voice, some of the voices that have been saying things for a long time. And we came up with this pledge that's on your tables, which is pretty simple, 4 things. We affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinian people and all people. 2, we oppose all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression. 3, we declare ourselves an apartheid-free community, and to that end, we pledge to join others in working to end all support to Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and military occupation. So this pledge was a way to start conversations again in communities. So the Joe Corey Foundation has signed on to it as a community and a group, but so have over 150 organizations and churches around the country and all parts of the United States, not just progressive communities, but really all across the community. And it's building up a new network of people and helping people to think about, well, what can we do collectively? How can we show our solidarity? How can we look at our own complicity? How can we, it's difficult to talk to members of Congress over and over again. We do, as Yousef said, we do have new opportunities, new campaigns. Right now in Congress, there are at least 2 bills. One is HR 3103, the Palestinian Children and Families Act. That is the 4th iteration of a bill led by Representative Betty McCollum from Minnesota that focuses on Palestinian children's rights. But this bill also talks about home demolitions and settler colonial expansion. So this bill now has 28 co-sponsors in the House. There isn't a Senate companion yet, but it is a way to talk about those issues and say we want accountability for our US aid. So that's an important thing to do. The second bill that's been introduced this year by Andre Carson from Indiana, which is the Justice for Shireen Act. And I see that Cindy has Shireen's pin on her. So it's talking about the Palestinian American journalist who was shot and killed by an Israeli soldier, and no accountability yet has been taken for her death. So this bill has 12 members of Congress that is asking for an investigation into her death. So those are 2 bills. There have been letters sent by members of Congress about settlements this year, about the visa waiver program that Yousef referred to. So there are opportunities for us to speak collectively to these issues, but we need to do it in our communities. You know, this room should have double the number of people. It is a bad weather day, but we need to bring our neighbors into the conversation. And it's hard, you know, it's hard to talk about these issues. It's hard to answer the question that you said, like, why is this happening? Why isn't there more people speaking out? And but we're doing it, you know. I think it's exciting that there are Jewish congregations who have signed this apartheid pledge. There are mosques that have signed. There are unions. There are some campuses that are getting ready to launch apartheid-free campuses. So I think it is saying we want a vision of something different, and I think that is necessary energy, because as Yousef said, the conditions on the ground right now could not be worse. And it is upsetting that the only time that the protests this last year stopped in Israel, which was pretty amazing to see. Quite frankly, I was impressed by the ability for people to shut down business as usual in Israel over these judicial reforms. It was amazing. And the one time that they stopped the protests was to bomb Gaza. And they started bombing Gaza in May for the 5 days. That's when the protesters went home. And it's like, really? Like, you know, so yeah, those connections, those issues need to be built. We need to have more, you know, people talking about it. And it is happening. But it is, you know, it's challenging. It's really challenging. So I'm going on too long, but I do think the apartheid-free communities is a great way to get involved, and so we are encouraging people along the way to think about this pledge and to put the signs up in your windows, and you know, make people know and have the conversation, which is what we also hope to do with this book.
Thank you, Jennifer and Yousef. And I'm really interested, we were able to talk about this initiative before, and the Rachel Corrie Foundation did sign onto it when they were asking for organizations to do that. But the idea of bringing it to our communities is really interesting, one that we should think about, but it's a lot of work, because we've done similar kinds of initiatives in the past. It takes a lot of people to engage with that. So I wanted to just, we have to conclude, but I want to just ask you to stop by our table if you're someone who would be willing to support the legislative work that we are doing to support HR 3103, which is opposing the treatment of Palestinian children, the ill treatment of Palestinian children who are under arrest or imprisoned, also home demolitions and the confiscation of Palestinian lands. That's basically what the bill is opposing. We want you to write letters. We want you to make calls, and there are some key times to do that. We also have a meeting coming up with Representative Strickland from the 10th District in November. And we are beginning just to plan for that, but we asked for it to be a larger meeting that other people could come to. It probably will only be a half hour, but we'd like more people than just the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of us have gone into those offices to come and be able to hear what her position on these issues are. It will take some organizing, because we have to manage that meeting so that it's organized and doesn't turn into a shouting match or something. So anyway, for those reasons, if you are willing to add your name to the people that will help with this, please sign our 10th district working group list. We've been trying to build this now for a while and are starting to think about how to make more use of it. You won't get contacts from us all the time, but there is work that you can do. So if you're willing to help with that, please sign. There also is information back there on the bills that we have been advocating for with Representative Strickland, the HR 3103 and the Shireen Abu Akleh. I got this pin from her niece. And so I would really love for you to pick up some of that info. That you can also call us if we run out of sheets back there. There are a couple more quick announcements. If you appreciated tonight's presentation and you have friends in Tacoma, Seattle, Bellingham, they'll be traveling north this week. The dates are in our announcements that we've been sending out and also on our website. So please tell people about it.